ได้ด้วยนะครับ and since this conference today is conducted bilingually and therefore for those who might need the translation services you can collect your headset which will provide you the translation Thai English and into Thai from the registration desk outside the conference room เอาละครับและในลำดับถัดมานะครับก็จะมีวิทยากรหลากหลายท่านครับซึ่งจะขึ้นมาบนเวทีแห่งนี้ด้วยนะครับสำหรับหัวข้อถัดไปนะครับจะเป็นหัวข้อนะครับภาษาอังกฤษ blockchain and other modern tools to tackle corruption นะครับหรือว่า blockchain หลายท่านคงจะรู้จักกันแล้วรวมถึงเครื่องมือใหม่ๆในการที่จะมารับมือกับ corruption นะครับและสำหรับเวทีถัดไปนี้ขออนุญาตที่จะเรียนเชิญนะครับวิทยากรในส่วนนี้ด้วย and the next session will be the speech under the topic blockchain and other modern tools to tackle corruption and the speaker for this session is the country managing director of Accenture Thailand and please give a big warm welcome to คุณนนทวัฒน์พุ่มชูศรีขอเสียงปรบมือต้อนรับท่านด้วยนะครับ
สวัสดีครับแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่าน Thank you very much for having me today here on this stage. It's really an honor. I don't typically talk about blockchain or other technology in the context of anti-corruption or anything like this, but more of in the business context where we are focusing on things like increasing market share, reducing the cost, improving efficiency and productivity. But when we come to think about it, it's actually very relevant because when we think about how we increase productivity in the business world, what technology does, it's actually trying to see where we can apply technology and automation to kind of assist in the process in areas where, typically it's being done by human. So by applying automation in the processes, we actually remove human judgment, remove a lot of papers in the process. So if you really look into that, the outcome of doing so is not only productivity, but also transparency as well. Because when we leave things up to human judgment, sometimes it's very difficult to understand why the decision is made, how it's made, what kind of data supporting that, such decision. But when we use technology or machine to do the job, right? Technology today, when we talk about, all the advanced technology in artificial intelligence, machine learning, when you look at the real application today, the technology that we really apply into those processes, we still have to train those machines. And the way we train machines, there must be specific rules, criteria for machines to make decisions. And that gives us a very good, transparent decision-making process, comparing to human judgment, which is sometimes very hard to understand why it's being decided that way. So that is one perspective of applying technology to increase transparency, right? But another thing that we also see when we apply technology, not only transparency, but efficiency. Because if you look around, services that we kind of need from the government, nobody is going to pay extra money if the service is already very good. But there are services today where, a lot of us have to take the whole day off from the office to wait in line just to get that one thing done. And once you have that inefficiency, that creates an opportunity for corruption. Nobody wants to pay extra money. Nobody wants to be a part of corruption. But when you compare it to spending the whole day waiting in the line just to do one thing, it's very hard for us to say, hey, I want to be a good citizen. I'm not going to, do the wrong thing. So when we apply technology into the business world, try to improve productivity and efficiency, in the same way, to achieve that outcome, right? Ultimately, it actually reduces the opportunities for corruption. Now, one may ask, aren't we already using a lot of technologies today? We're spending a lot of money buying technologies in private sector, in public sectors. Billions of dollars are being spent buying technologies. So what am I talking about? Yes, we use a lot of money in buying technologies today. But now there's one technology that I truly believe is really changing the way we think about technology. And that, what I would like to spend a few minutes talking about today, blockchain. I know a lot of us has been hearing about blockchain for a very long time. It's a very complex topic if we really want to technically understand what it really is. I'm not going to do that today. This is not a technical session, but I just want to try to highlight where I think it can apply and where how it relevant to how we're disrupting corruption. If you look at the left-hand side, this is where most of us are kind of, looking at the way we set up the technology today. We store the data in separate, what we call database. Now, if you look in private sector or the public sector, same thing, right? Each of the unit, department, organization, we tend to store our own data in our own premise. And in a lot of time, we store the exact same data, but we don't really store it in the same way. So for instance, as a citizen, you look around, I'm sure more than tens of government agencies have my personal data, my name, my address, date of birth, so on and so forth, right? But they store it in the different places. And the way we do things today, we have to kind of reconcile between them. And this is where humans, paper, are part of the process. You go and try to do something to get any kind of service. In many cases, you have to fill up a form. And come to think about it, information that you actually fill into those forms are something that some government agencies already have. But a different agency asks you to fill that same information for them on paper so that they can key that into their system. And what they do is they actually key into that system, and somehow there's somebody behind the scene trying to reconcile between different systems across different departments or across different organizations. So that's a lot of inefficiency. It takes a lot of time. There is a room for errors and fraud. Because when you do things on paper with human judgment and human interactions, that's how errors and frauds and inefficiency happen. But if you look at the right-hand side, which kind of looks similar, but if you try to understand blockchain in a very kind of logical setup, it's the way we store the same data in one logical place, which is it's like a block in a chain. But physically, it's actually stored in multiple places. Coming back to the left-hand side, one thing I forgot to highlight is that while having a data in the different databases like this, there is one guy called system admin who has a full access to their data because they think they own that data. So they can access all the data, they can change anything on that data because that person feels that, hey, I own that data. I have the right to do anything with that data. I can change, I can share, I can delete, I can update. On the other hand, on blockchain, the way it works is that although logically you use the same block, keeping the same data, but actually the way it's stored physically is that it's distributed onto different systems. And that's why sometimes we call it distributed ledger technology. Once it is distributed, there's no one person that can actually go in and make a change. Because once someone tries to access a data, what the chain does, it seeks consensus to see whether that data is still consistent with the rest of the nodes. So with that principle, blockchain prevents unauthorized change to the data. And what it also does is that the way it's stored, it is able to manage the access, who can use it, who can use the data, who can view and share the data. So that's the very different principle of keeping the data. I know it's quite technical, but I try to keep it at the principle level. So by doing so, right, one may ask, okay, now there's a new technology called blockchain. Is it going to change the world? Can we use blockchain for everything? Blockchain is not for everything. There are certain use cases where blockchain will be very helpful, right? First of all, if there is something that is expected to be used or shared or maintained by multiple parties, that's where blockchain can contribute a lot of value, right? Especially when we talk about in the public service context, right? You share the data from one department to another, you access the same data, you want to make sure the only people that have the right to access the data can access the data. That's where blockchain works very well. So there's a lot of collaboration between parties. There is the reconciliation of data, right? For example, today in the banking world, blockchain is being considered a lot to use, especially when you do things like money transfer. Because when you transfer money from one bank to another, what happens is one transaction, but you actually generate a record from your bank and another record in the destination bank, because you have to deduct the money from your bank and then you deposit the money to the destination bank. So those two records are being generated. So someone has to reconcile and say, okay, it's in sync. Whereas in blockchain, one transaction, you create one block, and relevant parties, which are two banks, can access that one information, right? So there's no reconciliation required, right? So anything today that you still have to reconcile between different systems, that's where blockchain can play. In blockchain, you don't update the records. You keep adding records. So once you perform one transaction and then you want to update it, you're not actually overwriting it. You create and not the next block to say that, okay, you are updating the previous block. So that's why it keeps the audit trail. The good thing is, putting it in the corruption, anti-corruption context, you see where things happen. Who does what and when, right? So those are the whole audit trail that you can track in the blockchain. And there is anything that is currently today that you rely on a middleman. Blockchain would remove the middleman because you don't have to reconcile the data, right? You don't need someone that you trust to reconcile the data for you and say, yes, it's okay, right? Because it's done in one go. So this is application where blockchain can work. Now, in the government world, what we have seen is a lot of governments today are thinking about what we call government as a platform. Because if you think about the previous slide, right, where blockchain plays is where you put multiple parties trying to share the same data. So when you put that in the government context, there's a lot of these government departments that are actually sharing the same type of data or something that they have to be part of the same process. Banks, revenue department, things about taxation, for example. Right? You talk about transactions in the banks, in the revenue department, treasury department. So all these things, if you use something like blockchain, it would actually help us to achieve, number one, efficiency, number two, data security, and also all the transparency, because you see all the audit trails, and only people that have access, that have the rights to access the data can do or perform such transaction, right? So this is where we see a lot of governments are doing it. Accenture, we actually published a report to look at the readiness of different governments, how ready they are to move into something called government as a platform. Many governments around the world are trying to do this. You can take a look, you can just Google it on the internet. It's publicly available. We see a number of countries in Asia Pacific that actually make the top 10. Singapore obviously is on top of the list. We see UK in the second. I think Korea is in the top 10 as well. And we see people like Saudi Arabia as well. So they're doing very well. Now, to be specific, what are the use cases that people start doing? Because doing something like this is not like someone coming out to say, okay, now today I'm going to be government as a platform, but it must be a use case where you start piloting something like this. So this is one example, right? National trade platform. This is what the Singapore government has done. I think it just went live 2 weeks ago, right? It's called NTP. Now it's renamed to Networked Trade Platform, right? So what it does is, in Singapore in the past, they have two separate systems. I think it's called TradeNet and Trade Exchange, right? TradeNet is where stakeholders can apply for permits to import, export, or move goods to one place to another. And they have Trade Exchange to actually exchange electronic documents. So what the NTP does is actually replacing the two systems, putting everything on the blockchain and connecting all these relevant stakeholders together. So as you can see, right, it's not only government agencies, but all the relevant parties in the end-to-end trade process, right, including shippings, banks, of course customs and other agencies as well. And in addition to that, right, it allows people to create a value-added service on top of the platform by using the data that the platform can provide. So when we think about something like this, right, coming back to what I kind of mentioned earlier, corruptions today, when we look around, a lot of opportunities that we see corruptions happening, it's to do with processes where it has a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of inefficiency in the process because there's a lot of paper processes and human judgment and as part of the process. Something like this, once we apply it, right, it shortens time to market, it's very efficient, very transparent, it's very convenient. So this will be a good example where we can apply technology like blockchain, right, to things that is closer to us. And of course, by having something like this, I truly believe it would significantly reduce the opportunity for corruptions. So I think I'm running out of time. So I just want to give you a flavor of what blockchain looks like and how some of the governments are adopting this technology into the key processes, like something like trade. So thank you very much. I'm coming back for the panel later. So I would like to just end my presentation here. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for such an enlightening presentation for blockchain, which is somewhat people might think, well, it's quite complicated.